Burn It with Fire by Stephen Lake. A team of new adventurers walked casually into a starter dungeon in a level that was built for them and began working their way through it. Not long after entering, they came upon a rat monster that hissed and squeaked at them fiercely. Immediately, the team's swordsman rushed forward and attacked it, but found that he couldn't breach its tough exterior. "Aw man, a tough monster already," he cried in discouragement. Seeing his leader's trouble, the team mage raised his wand and began gathering mana. "Don't worry, I've got this." "Fireball," he shouted. Realizing what his mage was just about to do, the leader began waving his hands frantically. "No, wait, don't use that spell. We're in a coal mine, you idiot," he shouted. However, the cry to stop didn't come quite fast enough, as the mage released the spell a moment later at the giant rat. And it did hit its mark as intended. However, unfortunately for the leader, it also detonated a pocket of gas nearby, causing a massive explosion that blew him off his feet. It also destroyed the rat at the same time, but at the cost of setting the dungeon on fire. Oh, that's not good," shouted the mage in a panic. He then cast Water Ball, soaking the seam of flaming coal in the wall, which immediately put out the fire. He then looked at his team leader with a deep, sheepish grin. "Sorry," he squeaked nervously. The leader, still a bit shaken by the blast, slowly sat up as the team cleric began healing him. "Ugh, seriously, dude? Situational awareness, man," he groaned as he held his head. The mage grimaced sheepishly again. "Yeah, again, sorry about that." The leader sighed lightly at this. "No, that's fine. Just try not to do it again, okay?" "Got it." As the cleric finished healing their team leader, the swordsman, she glanced up in the direction of the rat and soon spotted its charred, ravaged remains. "Well, on an up note, he took care of the rat," she replied. The swordsman looked briefly in the direction of the rat monster and then grunted. "Yeah, at the cost of a knot on my head," he muttered. The team then continued on down the dungeon into the next chamber, where they came across a gigantic snake monster. However, before any of the others can react, the team mage went into a complete apoplectic freakout and cast an even larger fireball at the snake. Upon seeing this, everyone else in the team went wide-eyed in shock and horror. "No!" they screamed. A moment later, the dungeon exploded once again. But this time the fire that was created was easily 3 times larger than before and grew quickly. "Not again! You keep forgetting we're in a coal mine, you idiot!" shouted the leader. "Oh, sorry," cried the mage anxiously. He then cast Water Ball repeatedly at the fire in order to put it out, but found that his efforts were too little for the situation they faced. Deciding that the only way he was going to stop this fire was to go all in, he pulled 3 high-power mana crystals from his inventory, and then cast Magiplexus. This created a massive wave of water that rushed down the tunnel, soaked the walls, and immediately put the fire out. However, moments later the wave rebounded, and then came rushing back at them like a tsunami. The leader, upon seeing this coming, narrowed his eyes and frowned incredulously. "Aw, crap." A moment later, the wall of water impacted the adventuring team and flushed them out of the dungeon and back to the starting point. After shaking themselves off and checking their gear, they then turned to the mage and glared at him in frustration. "Again?" asked the leader with incredulous disbelief. "Sorry," replied the mage sheepishly. The leader sighed at this, shook his head, and then led everyone back into the dungeon. They then made quick and efficient progress forward through the remainder of the level, and past the waterlogged bodies of nearly a dozen monsters who had been either drowned by the wave or crushed by its weight as it had surged down the cavern. The others all looked at this in amazement. "Do you think we'll get XP for taking them out like that?" asked one of them. The leader frowned slightly at this. "If anything, the mage probably will. And if not, I'm sure he'll file a complaint about it with the Dungeon Management Board," he muttered. The team then continued on through the first level, easily completing it in a few minutes with no further resistance. However, upon reaching the steps that descended down into the second level of the dungeon, but then paused when their eyes fell upon a most unusual and disturbing sight. The entire second level of the dungeon was flooded, likely by the tsunami wave of water from the mage's super spell. Everyone then slowly turned their eyes to the mage with a look of muted incredulity. "Seriously?" said the leader in disbelief. Just then the dead body of a goblin surfaced in the water, and then slowly floated over to the base of the stairs. Upon seeing this, the mage shrugged slightly. "Well, at least we don't have to deal with those monsters anymore," he replied. The team archer facepalmed at this, and shook his head in disbelief. "We're so not getting any XP on this crawl," he muttered. "Don't worry, we'll get more on the next level," said the mage encouragingly. The archer glared lightly at him. "And exactly how are we going to do that?" he grumbled. "All I've got to do is boil off the water, and we can then proceed to the next level." "Firewall," said the mage excitedly. This, unfortunately, immediately ignited a nearby pocket of trapped gas that caused another massive explosion. This time, however, it zeroed everyone out, forcing them to respawn at the opening of the dungeon. Everyone then stood there quietly for several moments and stared at him in spiteful incredulity. "We're in a damn coal mine. You idiot! Will you stop with the fire spells already?" shouted the team's leader. The mage, still somewhat dumbstruck by the whole encounter, blinked slightly. "Right, no fire spells. Got it," he replied with a hint of shell shock. The team then went back into the dungeon, returned to where the stairs were, and found that the water had partially drained away already. After finding a nearby trapdoor that was helping to drain out the floodwaters in the second level, they flipped the lever from a place of safety, opening it fully. This then rapidly drained all the water out of the second level. However, as they did, shouts and screams of surprise echoed up from it, indicating that, rather than draining somewhere else that was disconnected from the main dungeon, it had instead fallen into the next level below and accidentally washed away another questing team that was in front of them. As the team listened to this, including the screams, monster roars, sounds of crashing, and other grim echoes, they all quietly looked at each other with a look of muted horror. The mage then raised a finger and said, "At least it wasn't me this time." The leader frowned slightly at this. "Directly, no, but definitely by association." "Oh well, not our problem now," he replied. The team then continued forward through the formerly flooded second level, and soon came across piles of loot that had been dropped by the previously drowned monsters. However, as they were collecting the drops, another snake monster appeared out of a side passage and charged at them. Upon seeing this, the mage raised his wand and began to cast. "Don't worry about this, guys. I'll take care of this one." "Fireball," he shouted. "Oh no, don't you even think AB." Suddenly the cavern before them exploded, obliterating the snake monster, while also blowing everyone else off their feet and down the tunnel a ways. However, unlike last time, there was no fire because the walls and coal seams in the room were still wet from the previous flooding. After slowly crawling to his feet, the leader walked over and slapped the mage upside the head. "You idiot! I said no fireballs," he screamed. "All right, I forgot. Saw the... Don't sorry me. Stop doing it." "Okay," replied the mage apologetically. The team archer soon climbed to his feet and brushed off his outfit. "At the rate he's going, we're all going to need to buy more respawns before we attempt this dungeon again," he muttered. The team soon progressed further down the tunnel until they reached the steps to the third level. However, after walking only a short distance along its length, they came to a pile of dead adventurer bodies laying piled in a corner of the hallway where they had been washed after being drowned by the previously accidental flood. The other 3 team members all turned and glared at the mage, but said nothing. They then continued onward. As they moved into the 4th level of the dungeon, they encountered a large troop of armored frogmen. Upon seeing this, the mage raised his wand and began to cast his first attack spell. "Fire!" The leader, who was standing by his side, immediately grabbed the mage's wand before he could complete the spell. "I said no more fireballs. Now enough of that," he shouted. However, before he could do anything else, the mage's wand began shooting fireballs downrange at the frogmen, hitting them and detonating the coal around them in a massive, fiery explosion. The mage and the swordsman leader both looked at this in surprised disbelief before turning to each other in confusion. "What the hell was that?" asked the leader. The mage grinned sheepishly. "I think my wand was on macro," he replied. The leader's eyes narrowed at this. "You are so fired when we get done with this dungeon," he muttered. "Assuming we survive it without running out of respawns," said the archer. The leader, upon hearing this, rolled his eyes and then stormed away. As he did, the mage cupped his hands over his mouth and cried after him. "Just so it's on the public record, I am sorry for this," he replied. After extinguishing the new coal fire, the team resumed their journey through the dungeon again. After traveling for a short ways, they came across a gigantic spider who blocked their way with both its body and a gigantic wall of poison spiderwebs. Upon seeing this, the leader narrowed his eyes, put his sword away, and turned to the mage. He then huffed angrily for several moments before finally looking back at the spider. "I know I told you not to use fire again, but nah, your weapon's free. Burn that sucker to the ground," he said. The mage looked at him in perplexity. "But you said burn it with fire," roared the leader angrily. The mage, flinching slightly at this, held out his wand and sheepishly said, Fireball." A moment later, a powerful fireball leapt from his wand, struck the spider in its webs, and also detonated another hidden pocket of coal dust and mine gas. However, this time, instead of a massive explosion that knocked them off their feet, the resulting blast disintegrated the spider and sprayed its now liquefied remains all over the team, drenching them in spider goo. All 4 members of the team glared quietly down the mine towards the gooey, fiery remains of the spider with incredulity so deep that it could puncture the core of the earth. The swordsman leader of the team quietly wiped spider goo off his face and spit some of it out of his mouth before shaking his head in disbelief. "Oh, but of course," he muttered. He then turned and began walking back towards the entrance of the dungeon. The others all looked at him in confusion at this. "Where are you going?" asked the archer. "I'm so done with this place that I'm leaving," he muttered before storming away. The other 3 all then looked at each other in perplexity and eventually shrugged. "I guess we're done with this dungeon," asked the mage. The other 2 then shrugged slightly before turning and chasing after their leader.